Hi there. Welcome back to Prices at the Pumps, our Wednesday weekly look at all things energy related. Scott Squire is pleased to be joined, as we are each week, by Dan McTagg. And Dan, a couple things on the agenda today, but first things first, prices getting set at the pumps in this region tomorrow and Friday. Let's start, first of all, with Newfoundland and Labrador setting their prices tomorrow, Thursday. Where are things headed there?
Yeah, so we're looking at a decrease of 3.8 cents a liter. If I'm looking at the numbers and based on 7 days, of which one was actually a holiday, both in the United States and in many provinces here in Canada, President's Day in the United States, yeah, we should be seeing a decrease of 3.8 cents a liter. And for diesel, down 4.5. Very different from what we saw last week, in which we got those increases virtually spot on. And unfortunately, for many people, a week of much higher prices. So best advice for Newfoundland, hold off until tomorrow if you need to fill up. Same thing for heating oil.
That takes care of my home province of my birth. What about the rest of Atlantic Canada? Friday, prices are set in Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. What's happening there for consumers, Dan?
A little bit less of a savings for the three other Atlantic provinces. So PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick should see about a 3 cent, maybe 3.2 cent a liter decrease for gasoline. And diesel will be down about 4, maybe 4.1, 4.2 cents. Not as much because, of course, everyone has their own methodologies. In the case of Prince Edward Island, for instance, they use what's called the rack price, which is the wholesale price of the major companies. So all in all, a good news story. Wait till Friday. And the best one can guess is that these things don't happen forever. So take advantage of it this week while you can. It's likely that markets are sooner or later going to have to shake off the pessimism they've been demonstrating over the past year, overreacting to concerns about potential demand in China slowing down. The rest of the world is moving on, and demand is extraordinarily high, which is why prices are really have nowhere to go but up as we head towards the deeper months, mid months of 2024.
And Dan, that brings me to a look ahead. We always like to look beyond the now and see where trends and things might be going weeks and months down the road. We're almost through February, hard to believe, but what's your sense from what you're seeing on global markets, geopolitical events, your best guess as to what consumers can expect when they fill up their car, their home heating tank, whether it's natural gas, et cetera? What's your sense of where things are going to be headed short term, but also a couple months down the road?
Well, I think when it comes to heating products, propane, natural gas, look for those prices to drop. There's been an abundance of production, so much so that I think many producers this time next year are going to have a hard time staying in business. So on natural gas and propane, I think prices are going to remain at best stable, or at worst stable. At best, they're likely to drop anywhere from 4 to 7% over the next couple of weeks as we head towards this transition from winter demand to summer demand for those products. Same thing for heating oil. It is a proxy, but it does follow diesel a lot closer. We know that the world is seeing tightness in diesel supply, but it won't be like last year. And if you look, Scott, this time last year, heating oil and diesel prices are pretty much where they were. And so for that reason, I suspect that there's probably a tendency to believe that diesel could drop off while gasoline surges ahead. When it comes to those two products that we use for most of our transportation fuels, so rail, truck, jet, for diesel, you're going to find that those prices are going to remain robust to the high end. I would expect between now and the 1st of April, we could still see about a net increase of about 5 to 7 cents a liter. That could impact heating oil as well by about half that amount. And gasoline, I think that's the real concern. Gasoline could move up by about 8 cents a liter net between now and April 1st before the federal government's new carbon taxes kick in.
Dan, I recently saw a clip on X, and it was elsewhere, but that's where I saw it. And basically, it was a reporter questioning Minister Guilbeault about the fact that the United States is very aggressive in pursuing, their climate agenda, but they do it without a carbon tax. And I'm certainly going to paraphrase here. I don't want to misquote Minister Guilbeault, but in essence, what he said was that he's been to Washington many times and he's spoken to numerous senators who have all expressed a wish that they could have a carbon tax in the United States. But again, the reporter's question was, how can the United States be as active as they are and as diligent as they are in pursuing their climate goals, which are, pretty high level, but they do it without a carbon tax, and Canada has a carbon tax. Dan, if I asked you that question, hey Dan, how come the United States can pursue their climate goals minus a carbon tax, but Canada needs one? What would your answer be, going back to putting your MP hat on?
Well, exactly. From experience, I say Canada got too crazy. Canada got ahead of itself. Even after it shut down coal plants, and even after it went through this metamorphosis 20 years ago of using a lot more natural gas and other sources of energy, and recognizing that it could build out even more hydroelectric, we still decided to reduce and say whatever the threshold was, whatever the standard was for us to decrease our emissions, we were going to choose years after we did all the heavy lifting, the good work. The Americans waited. Yeah, we're going to achieve our climate goals, but we're going to do so after we say we can achieve these drops by converting our fleet of coal plants into natural gas plants or nuclear, whatever have you. So the Americans were actually a little smarter. They didn't try to jump the gun and be cute and trendy like Canadians. And as a result, we have rooked ourselves because we're looking to try to achieve technologies which can't deliver the amount of energy and power that we need. You consider the Canadian economy, despite its slow growth, is still seeing about a 3.5% increase in population. How do you expect, once you've used all the technologies that allow you to shift away from coal into natural gas, how do you expect to achieve those lofty goals? Not without doing significant damage to the economy. In other words, the United States will achieve its goals without a carbon tax. In Canada, unfortunately, it doesn't just have one carbon tax. As you know, here in Atlantic Canada, you've got the big one, 14.31 cents a liter, 5.8 cents for the second carbon tax in Nova Scotia. This is really a very significant detriment to the country, and for the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and whatever to go around saying Americans want carbon tax. I can absolutely say, as someone who worked in the United States, my work with Gas Buddy, with tomorrowsgaspriceday.com, nothing could be further from the truth. Any politician who try to pull that kind of a stunt in the United States, unless they're in a woke state like maybe New York or California, where there is, in fact, a carbon tax, would be shown the door. And I can tell you, nobody in their right mind would do that. So Stephen Guilbeault, again, trying to pretend he's somehow some master in understanding foreign affairs, should stick to his knitting of destroying this country with his stupid regulations, like shutting down roads in this country.
Dan, that brings me to some of your activities on social media and X, and I follow you, and I see some of the debates that you get into, and I like to give you an opportunity here, to sometimes answer your detractors or your critics. I've got a chance to know you over a couple of years, and I know that you're very pragmatic and very data and analytics driven. You look at the data, you look at the science, you look at the numbers, and you don't really have a horse in the race. When you have certain folks coming at you and saying, oh, you're a shill for big oil, or oh, you were an MP and you were a liberal, why are you acting this way? Again, I like to give you an opportunity every few weeks, Dan, just to kind of let folks know why it is you do what you do, and why you say what you say, and why you bring forward the thoughts and opinions that you do.
Oh, thanks for that, Scott. I mean, I'm pragmatic. I think we do what we can do as the ability to do those things emerges. I have no trepidation with saying and have fought on competition issues, bringing in concerns about the grocery mergers 20, 25 years ago, oil monopolies, these kind of things that have had an effect and impact on consumers. But if someone's going to try to bamboozle me with the idea that a molecule like CO2 is somehow going to bring the world to an end, and that we're going to see no more snow in this country, and that any unusual event in weather is somehow the result of that molecule in slightly larger numbers, which of course is an inert gas that actually greens the world. Anybody who tries to pull that is going to have their science and their politics right. Because I can tell you right now, a lot of people were very skeptical 7 years ago, 6 years ago, when I started saying there is going to be an affordability crisis in this country. Oh, no, it's all about the environment. It's all about, it's all about health. It's all about these all the other important things. But here we are today, several years later. And in fact, the energy crisis created by woke politicians and woke capitalists has now stung the country and is hurting the world. There are, of course, other issues to be considered, but anybody who would turn their back on the wealth that Canada has in terms of its energy, anybody who would somehow dismiss that and try to demonize it and say that an inert gas like CO2 or what Canada is doing to provide the world with much needed energy is somehow a bad thing, I think you really have to look at whether or not these are people you should take seriously, much less allow foundations and charities to pay for them to continue to advocate for things that are, extraordinarily damaging to the unity of the country, not to mention counterproductive to the very idea that we can do a little bit more on the environment. So, look, I hold back nothing. I have no skin in the game. For me, it's always about making sure consumers are protected. My track record speaks for itself. And that's not just something overnight. It's something I've been doing for about 30, 35 years.
Again, we talk about the carbon tax a lot. How can we not, right? It's prices at the pumps, and carbon tax directly affects that. And yesterday, Premier Scott Moe from Saskatchewan sent out a post, and I'll get that put up on screen here in a second. But in essence, saying Saskatchewan's decision to remove the Trudeau carbon tax on home heating dropped Saskatchewan's inflation rate in January to 1.9%, down from 2.7% in December, and well below the national rate of 2.9%. And then he says, according to StatsCan, in Saskatchewan, the collection of the carbon levy ceased in January 2024, contributing to the province's year-over-year price decline of natural gas. And then he has in parentheses, minus 26.6%. He goes on to say a little more, and again, we have that up on screen. But Dan, you're familiar with that. I've already seen people attacking and saying, well, that's fudging the numbers and it's this and this. But when you hear that, that seems to be real data to me. What's your reaction?
Well, the reaction is, I told you so. Anybody who thinks that putting a 14.31 cent a liter plus HST carbon tax on fuel, or as you see in Atlantic Canada, add another 6 to that, 22, 23 cents on $1.60 to $1.80 is somehow not inflationary, representing 15 to 20% of an unnecessary imposition. That is not inflationary. Well, now you have evidence. Not just Saskatchewan, which dropped its carbon taxes on heating fuels, so propane, natural gas, heating oil. The neighboring province of Manitoba also dropped the equivalent amount, 14 cents a liter on its provincial sales tax. The new government of Rob Canoe decided to put that forth, and they too saw remarkably an inflation rate which is far less than the national average. That's something that is not an outlier. It's in fact something that is difficult to dispute, and it's certainly not something that the trendies out there can ignore. So I have made the contention, I will continue to make the contention that carbon taxes are highly inflationary, and that trying to suggest somehow, some way that they're not is simply avoiding the point that I think we all need to be adult about, and that's we do need to consider the fact that carbon taxes and other regulations, absent those, I think you'll find inflation get back in check, and we can finally start to get interest rates down in this country and get the economy up and running again.
And then maybe just a reminder for our audience, what happens on April 1st?
So on April Fool's Day, you're going to be feted with yet another increase in carbon taxes. So your gasoline prices will go up about 3.7 cents a liter, your diesel about 4.2 cents a liter with HST. Now, remember, those two taxes, or that, and of course the clean fuel standard, which will go up probably 6 months from, so on June 1st, means that by 2030, you're already over a third of the way to what will be the additional cost of diesel here in the provinces that have 15% HST, 75.3 cents a liter between the clean fuel standard and the federal government's carbon tax. And by the way, that second carbon tax, regardless of the debate and how good you feel about it, isn't rebated at all. And of course, for gasoline, up 63 cents a liter. So think about it this way. We have inflation. We have a carbon tax or a series of carbon taxes driving up the cost of inflation now making its way through the economy. And everyone wants to say, oh, but it's only 0.1%. Look, if you do believe that, then, I got a great deal in last year's winter snow for you. But otherwise, other than giving your head a shake, recognize the damage it's doing to the Canadian economy. This is not happening in the United States. I can tell you this. When it comes to things like food, for instance, the American inflation, as far as wholesale prices are concerned, hasn't been a factor post-COVID. It has in Canada. And there's only one factor that's really kicked that into high gear: the carbon tax. So anybody who thinks that voting for this kind of stuff is cool and trendy, you better have a deep bank account, or perhaps you want to disclose beyond your political allegiance to a party, whether or not you're getting some kind of a grift to support that kind of nonsense.
Dan, you referenced inflation, and the most recent inflation numbers show that in January down to 2.9% in Canada. And on the surface, that's great news. That's a big drop. 2.9. That's a low number compared to what we've been seeing. But when you see that number, is there more to it than strictly, oh, it dropped to 2.9?
Yeah, there'll be month-to-month comparison. If it's being driven by gasoline, which it often is, fuel, look for next month not to give the same rosy picture. That's because gasoline prices in Canada are 4% higher this February than they were last February. Although we're not finished with the month, that could change. But here's the other side of it. Is this the result of getting inflation in control, or is it the throttling of the Canadian economy? I believe it happens to be that, and that people are not finding work, that things are not moving. The economy is on the verge of seizing up in many respects. And if that's the case, and we're celebrating a low inflation rate because people no longer have any money to spend and make ends meet, then we have a far more serious problem on our hands. Now, I'm really referring to the adults in the room, not the pretend folks out there who want to push their woke history, which has got us into this point. I think we need to be very serious about not just inflation, but deflation. And if the way in which stats can, adduces numbers, you cannot trivialize the cost of living, particularly the cost of energy, which has a lot to do with driving prices up or down. Either way, I hope I'm wrong about the economy slowing down, but I think it's evident to everyone out there. No one's getting an increase in pay. Everyone is concerned about their ability to make ends meet. The cost of living continues to rise much faster than 2.9%, I might add.
Dan, before we wrap up, anything else that's catching your eye or your ear in the markets, either domestically, internationally, geopolitically, et cetera?
I'm concerned about the federal government reaching in for another $77 billion to cover something. We know that they asked for an extra $440 billion to cover the debt that we've seen over the past couple of years, but they've now had to reach even deeper. I hope that's on a signal of something that they're anticipating, defaults, or somehow the federal government's revenue stream has cratered. If that is the case, then we have a far more serious problem on our hands. But I think that's a signal that apart from the our institutions like the Bank of Canada getting it spectacularly wrong on inflation and warning and encouraging people to go out and borrow as much as they wanted because it would be lower for longer. A quick reverse course, or not too nimble a response to these to this monetary squeeze could lead to enormous amount of dislocation and economic disruption for the country that could be long lasting, well into the next several years.
Dan, as always, appreciate you bringing your expertise and insights and shedding a light on some of these things that the average person may not be able to have access to that kind of information. So we appreciate it. We wish you well the rest of this week. Have a great weekend. I know we're in a bit of a deep freeze here right now. Little milder temperatures ahead. I'm not sure what it's like in your neck of the woods, Dan, but chilly here. I'm looking forward to, I don't know, like June maybe.
Well, we're getting that weather here in Ontario. It's 7 degrees today, and I'll see if we can get a few people in Ottawa to speak a little bit more to blow that hot air towards you.
And we'll leave it there. Thanks as always, Dan. We'll do this again next week.
Take care, Scott. Bye-bye.
Bye.